Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, we have a guest joining us. We have N Leigh Hunt, who is an award winning author, crime historian, broadcaster, and keynote speaker in the United Kingdom. He is also a member of the American Society of Criminology and considered an expert on multiple school shootings and mass murders. Most recently, he won the 2025 CrimeCon UK Award for Outstanding Indie Podcast and the 2025 CrimeCon UK Award for Podcast Rookie of the Year. You might have heard from him when I did recently a book review of I Don't Like Mondays. However, he is here to not only to discuss all of that, but also his most recent project in Esto. So without further ado, let's bring on N Leigh Hunt. Hi, welcome.
How are you? It's evening here in the UK. It's really bright where you are. I'm guessing it's morning.
It's about 2 o'clock p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just starting to get dark over here. So lovely. Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to see you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for joining. So we have a lot to talk about because you have a very well put together resume and you have done quite a bit. But I want to kind of start from the very beginning of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into true crime.
Well, okay, we'll start from the beginning. I mean, I was born in South Africa. My parents are British, and they took me to America as a young boy, and I came back to the UK about 25 years ago. And I've been here ever since. Even though I've lived in the UK for the longest time, I still have quite an American accent. So people often stop me and ask where I'm from. They think I'm Irish or Canadian or something. But yeah, the true crime question is a funny one. I get asked it a lot, and I actually ask it to other people as well, because I think anyone who consumes true crime content has that moment that make them into true crime. Or even when you talk to police officers, you sort of say, what was the moment that you knew you wanted to be a cop or a prosecutor or a defense attorney, whatever it was. There's those moments. And for me, there's a couple things that happened. And they're kind of around the same time, but kind of around when you're around sort of 9, 10 years old. One of them was I was watching a documentary about Lizzie Borden and Jack the Ripper. And I just was so absolutely shocked by the old photos from the 1880s. And I looked at those photos and I thought, that is the most gruesome thing I've ever seen. And it kind of stuck with me. And then a year later, there was the Cleveland elementary school shootings, the I Don't Like Monday story, which I ended up writing a book about. Actually happened in my town when I was 10 years old. My dad was heavily involved in that. And it kind of changed our way of thinking. So when I left the UK and went to America, and we were living the American dream, and I'm a big fan of the American dream and all that, I'm a big fan of all that, going to America, especially at that time in the 70s and early 80s. We had accounted for everything, hardship, hard work, long days, sunshine, beaches. We were living the dream in California, but we had never really put together in our minds that guns could be part of our day to day. So I think, the macabre of Lizzie Borden's story and seeing that as a young, impressionable mind on television, and then also having crime hit home so close to me. Those are like the two events where all of a sudden I found myself reading nonfiction almost exclusively. And then in my teenage years, it was just consuming the books. And that was you get into the 80s, and that's how old I am. You get into the sort of the heydays of the Bundy and then into Dahmer in the 90s. And, this was like serial killer 101. We were just learning about Quantico and the FBI's profiling. And now we've realized that's all a bunch of shit. But at the time, it seemed really, really like, whoa, this is groundbreaking. We could define, serial killings and murders. And it just was so fascinating. I went down that rabbit warren, and I kind of stayed there for the next 40 years. Yeah, that's kind of how it started for me. It's probably no different than anyone else. There's that moment in time. I was reading Lindsay Wade's book, In My DNA. She's a cop from Seattle, and she says in her book, and I really understood it. It was really good, really quick read, very good book if you get a chance to read it. It's called In My DNA. She says that somebody entered her home and walked into her bedroom and left her bedroom, and she remembers seeing it as a young child. And that was the moment when she went, I'm going to become a cop and try and stop people like that. I
Interesting.
just thought, wow, I got it easy. You know, I had a horrible event that happened in my hometown, but far away from my family. And then I just saw something on television. So I think compared to other people who are police officers who are out to solve crimes and put themselves in harm's way, it's quite easy sitting here in my safe British home and just writing about it or doing podcasts or blogging or researching or whatever. It's really easy for me. I don't have to go out with a gun and defend anybody. So my true crime journey is literally just consuming and writing, and trying to learn as much as I can. The historical piece, I don't go into psychology. Let the psychologists do that. I just tell the story, tell the history, and you can make of that what you want. But it's the facts for me. Just tell it like it is, chronological, down the line. People are smart enough to decide right from wrong, decide what is relevant and what isn't relevant. I just write it. You guys can consume it. So I kind of turned that corner from being somebody who's a scared 10-year-old to now feeling like I've taken control of that demon in my 50s.
That is so full circle, because what you were saying in regards to something happening so close to home from you, you see that with a lot of people that kind of have an interest in true crime. And that's kind of what I'm finding through networking with so many people. Everybody knows somebody or knows something that happened in their area. And there's always that little personal connection. So that's interesting that that happened to you at such a young age growing up where you were.
Well, I think it's truth with everybody. I think, if I asked you that question, not to turn it back on you, I get it's your show, but if I were to ask you that question, what made you want to be a true crime, YouTuber or content creator? I mean, there must be something, you don't have to share it, but there must be something that made you go, this is that moment where I'm fascinated with that. You picked up my book, you read my book. So there's something just as wrong with you as there is with me. You know what I mean?
Well, I wouldn't word it like that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You know
no,
what I mean?
I'm very open about mine. Is I find not so much a fascination with the perpetrator, but more so how the society and community around that person reacts. I find that absolutely fascinating, because it's not always how it should be. And for me, growing up, I was so young when the Bundy murders happened, and I was only, I think, 5 years old when Bundy was executed. But to see what his legacy left and how people reacted to him being on trial, that fascinated me. Or Richard Ramirez, the same thing too. It's just like, what is happening? How has this become like a circus spectacle? I find that very fascinating.
Yes, I know Rich Ramirez, don't know him, but that case was happening in Southern California when I was living there. So, we've never in our lifetime, as I guess as American, the American side of me, and even in Britain, that I'm never that far away from some major serial killing story that's happening. You never are. There's so many people in this world, and we live in very, very densely populated countries where there's always a story, and the thirst for this story hasn't stopped. I mean, we talk about how crazy the world is today, and some horrible things have happened in the last week. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But then you go back 100 years ago, Bonnie and Clyde were making news, and even 100 years before that, they were writing songs for murderers who were being executed, and there were odes to killers. And so the fascination with true crime goes right back hundreds of years. It's nothing new. We just have so many more mechanisms and ways to consume it and create it. I mean, you and I can both create something with just a laptop, and we can put it out to a global market. And that certainly wouldn't have happened 100 years ago, 30 years ago. That didn't happen. So when I wrote I Don't Like Mondays, that was a story that touched my family. My father was the journalist who was managing the team that went and got the famous quote. And then the song kicked off, and that was an enormous hit here in the UK. That was a number one for weeks. And then nobody had ever written a story. It went a long time, and nobody had written the book about her. Nobody was concerned about the first school shooter. And I'm watching this phenomenon of school shootings happening over and over and over again. They're repeating themselves over the last 40 years. And I thought someone should go back to the beginning and maybe see if there's some similarities between, Brenda Spencer, the shooter from 79 in Cleveland Elementary School, San Diego, to say Adam Lanza or Park. I don't want to throw out names of killers because that's not what this is about. But are there some similarities? So I've been communicating with about 12 different school shooters across the country, and they've been happily chatting away. Some I have good relationships with, some we just chat here and there, some are just pen pals, some I get the sporadic message every so often, and they're all incredibly different. And what I've learned about that is that there is no typical school shooter. And there's those and that in, you know, to go along with that, there is no typical school shooting definition. So, you know, the FBI may say this, but then there's like an online database of some joker in the Midwest who's now decided that school shooting encompasses everything. So anytime anybody brings a weapon to school, he's now made this list of 40,000 school shootings. And I'm not saying he's wrong, but you know, he's certainly doing it with gusto to prove the fact that guns are bad. So he has his agenda. You know, I don't know. I just know that people hurt and they express themselves in different ways, and they like to kill other people. And the similarities really kind of stop there. Of the again, the 12 that I've communicated with, none of them are really like Brenda, and Brenda's not really like any of the others. And she was kind of the first. It was, you know, I call it the first modern school shooting, so you can make it just innocuous enough so we can argue about it, have that open discussion. Charles Whitman, perhaps, you know, 66, he shot from the tower in Austin. I think that that's not a school shooting because he went to the tallest tower in town. If the tallest tower in town was at the shopping center, he would have gone there. Therefore, it would have been a school shooting. But that's okay. We could argue the nuts and bolts of it. I think it's when someone takes a weapon, a large weapon, and decides to kill students that they don't know. That was my definition. And when I actually looked at all of the evidence, there's sort of the old day ones from way back when, and then there's the ones that kind of begin the whole modern phenomena. And I landed on Brenda Spencer, and I think that one in 79 where she took the rifle, shot from her front door, and just started plucking children for no reason at all. There's just zero reason for it. And to me, that tends to be more consistent with other shooters of today, where the reasoning is so vague, or there isn't any reason at all, or it's their own personal hatred, and they choose a school that's either known to them or near to them, and they go for it. Yeah, I've kind of lost my way through the questions there, but I think you can see how when you get into that rabbit warren, like you do as you get into true crime, you find yourself in these sort of spaces where certain things just fascinate you. Like maybe you were fascinated with Bundy. You know, he did so many interviews, and he was an appealing chap, and he spoke eloquently, and I you know, and he had his followers, and he had a fan club. So this cult of personality, not that Brenda has that, nor does she deserve it, nor did Ted Bundy deserve it, but I can see why it happens. And I think as we got into the videotape age, and then we got into the internet age, and now we're in the AI age, I don't see true crime and its consumption or its content creation slowing down anytime soon. I think people will always be fascinated with it. And the amount of podcasts we have in that space, sure, they might get a little bit smaller, might get a little bigger, but we are no lack of content. There is plenty of stories out there. There are so many unsolved. There are so many wrongful convictions or rightful convictions that stories haven't been told, and still so many victims. I think if we look at history, and that's my bag, hundreds of years people have been following true crime. So it's not new. And the way we put it out is new. And there will be other ways to do that going forward. So maybe we're not as weird as I thought we were. Maybe we're just, maybe we're just normal people doing our stuff.
Well, one of the things that you touched upon that I kind of want to expand a little bit is I think as a society, just day to day in our community, we want to be educated, we want to be informed, and we kind of want an easy answer of being able to spot. I think I could spot if someone like that was in my town or at my school or in my neighborhood. But you can't always, like you said, you've talked to so many different individuals and they don't all fit the same category. And that's one of the things that I always go back to saying on my show in regards to serial killers when I cover those cases is people want monsters to look like monsters, and they don't always look that way. It's not so easy to put everybody into one square box and say, this is how we define them. That's how you spot one. It's not that easy. And from your perspective, you're saying that exact kind of same thing with people who you've been talking about. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think you can typify. And again, there's lots of ways to define this. So and criminality fits many molds. There's always like the 4 reasons why people commit crime, whether it's love, hate, money, or revenge, or whatever. There's the criminology standpoint, which I think makes sense. But this concept that you can tell who's the serial killer, I don't know. There's sometimes where you can. And I think if you're walking down the street, you can tell when a criminal is acting in a certain behavior where you're uncomfortable. I think our own spidey sense tells us that. But this concept that you can tell this person would be if I just say this one's the school shooter or this one's going to be the serial killer, you could probably get pretty close, I think. But then those molds get broken very quickly with someone like Ted Bundy or even BTK. I don't think anybody ever suspected him. He's a strange dude. I've spoken to him in prison. He's a strange guy. Definitely on the spectrum. He's very particular. And I think people just saw him as an introvert. They never would have seen him as being anything else. And also the victim or the would-be victim. Let me rephrase that. Because, you are more likely, and I'm going to be really honest here, you are more likely to be a victim of certain types of horrible crime than I would. And let me explain that. So midnight tonight, I want to jump to the local shop and grab something to eat. I grab my keys. I go out the front door without even thinking. Whereas I maybe you don't. Maybe you live in a neighborhood where you feel very, very safe. But an awful lot of women would think twice before doing that. Right. And so I think we look at these things from a different angle. So often when I was reading about Ted Bundy, and I did a lot of reading about his books, and Ann Rule's book was probably the one that started all that, and Helter Skelter were probably the ones that started it all. I often read and thought, what's the mind of Charles Manson? What's the mind of Jeffrey Dahmer? Or over here in England, we had Dennis Nielsen, who was a horrible killer in North London. When I read those books, I often consider myself in the mind of the perpetrator. That's a weird place to be. And I don't know if you do that. But again, maybe that's the male-female thing, or maybe that's just the Nick and Danny thing. But, I often try to read the book in both positions to try and understand. And I'm no closer. 40 years of consuming true crime, I'm still no closer. I've written books about it. I've spoken to the killers. I'm still no closer. And I've now kind of reached that point where I'm thinking that a lot of the psychology, and especially court psychology, where it's an opinion rather than fact, I think there's a lot of hocus pocus in that. I think it's a money churn. I think it's a cottage industry. I think a court will believe whoever pays the highest or the best spoken psychologist to come into court. I'm not a massive fan of how that works. I think it delays the court process. I think victims end up hearing 10 versions of the same event. It doesn't really help them any. I think it gives the killer a little bit of glory to know that they're being interviewed and asked their questions and they're the center of attention. So I'm not always a fan of the psychology of it. So I've left it out of my book because I Don't Like Mondays, Brenda was never really interviewed or asked or put into that churn of psychology terms and categories, which, hey, that's great. But in the annals of crime, how's that working out? Does that mean anything? Does that work? The FBI never caught one serial killer, but yet they are still the authority on serial killers. But yet they've never caught one serial killer. So, the whole thing made me just look at it in a historical context and just say, look, we're not learning anything from just making it up as we go or finger in the wind. Let's look back at history over the course of hundreds of years with as much evidence as we've got to maybe come to that conclusion. And it brought me back to Brenda, the first thing that started it for me. Let's write a book about her. Find out what makes her tick. Unfortunately, we found that she is just how would I put it? Unsympathetic and not really acknowledging what she did was completely wrong, and she may never be forgiven for it. That's not the same for all of the school shooters. So I'm back. I'm doing the full circle again. You see what I did there? I'm weaving us back to the beginning. Hopefully you got a better question than the last one. Don't take that the wrong way, but one that I can answer.
No worries. In regards to, you've talked a bit about the court process. The United States and I'm guessing the UK court system is very different. Or maybe there are some similarities, but can you touch a little, and I know that might be a bit of a vague question, But
There's-
from your research or just kind of what you see now living in the UK, how does that impact kind of the crime that you research or the crime that we see all over the media in regards
well,
to the outcomes because of the courts?
yeah, I'm gonna. That's a massive question. So let me get specific about certain places and certain things. So my most recent podcast is called In Esto, and thank you to CrimeCon UK for the highly commended awards. I got 2 of them. Super lucky. I was
Congratulations.
nominated for the Clue Awards in USA, CrimeCon in Denver. Thank you so much for our small little independent podcast. You really made a few people really, really happy. Thank you. I couldn't be more honored. That's a story of what I think is a poor trial in Florida with a 6-person jury. Now, in Scotland, it's a 15-person jury. And in each state in America, the laws are quite different. All of them, again, just my opinion, all of them began from the legal system that's here in the UK. And I think UK is kind of, especially in regards to, medical examining and the separation between courts and police and medical, those separations are very defined in this country. And when you're arrested in the UK, you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, that's a great expression used in many states in America, and I'll separate the states because they're different. California's different from Florida. Florida's different from
Yeah.
Massachusetts. Utah, again, very topical at the moment, is very different than Florida and California and Massachusetts. So, in the UK, we have that definitive separation where if you're arrested, your name may not be released to the press. So often these horrible crimes happen in this country, and they do. And that person is arrested, and they will say, "We've arrested a 30-year-old female for a crime." That's all they'll say. Now, often the internet does what the internet does, or things leak, and sometimes it gets out. Or when it's a case of someone who's very famous, you'll know who that is by where they live, and the neighbors will say that's who lives in that house, that's who was arrested. So often these things get out. But in many cases, and we had a big one here in this country where someone was arrested, the name got out, and we all knew who it was, but nobody said anything. It wasn't in the media, but we all knew. So amongst ourselves, we were saying to each other, we know who that is, who's in that big trial. But it wasn't until the trial begins, the jury is selected, and they begin the actual opening arguments. Then the media can report because it becomes fact. Up until that point, it isn't factual.
Interesting.
Whereas in the USA and in California, Florida, again, most of the states, they do what's called a perp walk, which is not just announcing who the killer is, or the suspect, should I say. They walk them down the street and parade them. Brenda did a perp walk. Bundy did a number of perp walks. Just this week in the United States, as you know, the Charlie Kirk assassination, we knew who the police were after. Well, we now find out that they released the name after they'd arrested him, but surely he hasn't done a trial. He's innocent till proven guilty. In the letter of the law in the UK, his name should not be mentioned, certainly not by the people who arrested him, and not by the judicial. But also another difference I'm finding in Florida, getting more specific to my podcast, the medical examiners work for the police. So you have a crime, or you don't even have a crime. You have an accident. You have a fatality. You have an injury. Medical examiner rocks up on site, if they even choose to go to the site. They might just take the police report and some photos and then look at the body and say, we'll make our expert opinion with the police in the room, with the police overseeing them, telling them their thoughts before the medical examiner even makes their decision. I was speaking with Joe Scott Morgan the other day. He's actually a lovely man, and he's a brilliant guy. Love him. And highly intelligent. He did 2 episodes on Inesto, bonus episode 11 and 12. Thank you, Joe. And he pointed out some really obvious things that weren't done at the crime scene in Esto, Florida, story of the podcast. Really obvious things that, because I was so deep in my own world, following the chronological story and telling what happened at trial, I didn't even notice something that really is Coroner 101. And it just goes to show that people who are coroners or people who are police officers or people who are judges or whatever it is you do in that 3-part process, you're still practicing and you're going to make mistakes. And the British system, I think, compared to Florida, and if we use the OJ trial as an example in California, I think it's a better system because it's still back to its original innocent until proven guilty. Whereas I think America started that way, and individually the states have changed and manufactured their own laws and rules, and even things that are just understood differently. They're interpreted. The law is interpreted differently. You know, you have cameras in the courtroom. That's common. In fact, people are disappointed in America when there's not cameras in the courtroom.
Right.
Something that would not happen here in the UK.
Yeah.
Some on the reverse, and I'm still going to go a little further here. The reverse of that is people like to believe extraordinary things. And if you're not seeing it on TV for yourself, then there must be some crazy, you know, the Masons are all changing decision makers, or the Knights Templar have made this, and it's all some like Illuminati thing where the judges are all related to the prosecutors. And I'm not saying that isn't happening, but there is no evidence to say that that's true.
Right.
Just like when you watch it on TV in court, nothing changes. The judges and lawyers and everybody could still all have lizards climbing up their backsides. But just because it's on TV doesn't necessarily mean that isn't happening. It just means you're not seeing it. So cameras in the courtroom, I quite like the idea because I like seeing justice play out. But when I see things where the jury, in some cases, I've seen it, prosecutors definitely, defense attorneys without question are playing up to the cameras. And that's where we lose sight of law. So the difference is right there. One is a entertainment piece in some respects.
Right.
And England still, or Britain and Scotland, different laws even between England, Scotland, Wales. They are still trying to maintain the origins of innocent before proven guilty as best they can in a modern society. So big question, but I think that's as good as I can do. I think
that was an excellent answer.
Too big a question, but we're trying our best over here, and I know America is as well. And I know that they, you know, many states are, you know, it's about law, it's about the right and wrong of law. But in America, you have this, you know, legally innocent or innocent. Now in Britain, that's the same thing. In the USA, not so much. Those are two different definitions.
Right.
I always sort of say it like it's Elvis impersonators. Okay, so when you say Elvis impersonator, you think of one thing. But when I say Elvis, you think of something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, right? But the Elvis impersonator, you picture something totally different than the king. But yet they should have the same definition, but they don't. And
that is a very good analogy.
That's legal interpretation. So,
yeah.
and again, it happens here in this country. It does, but we try our best. We try our best. And so many good, hardworking folk. I know a lot of lawyers. I know a lot of cops who have to testify months after they made the arrest. Months after they make the arrest. Sometimes years after they make the arrest. And their notes have to be spot on.
Mm.
So, and that's the same in both countries. So there's lots of similarities. Courts, the right to appeal, very similar. Jury selection is similar. Subpoenas. There's so many things that are absolutely similar that the systems are very, 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 very close to each other. It's just that interpretation of Elvis and Elvis impersonator, I think, are the differences.
So thank you for that very well explained answer, because it's clearly not a one part difference there. But that is very interesting. And
and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a historian.
It's here, you do see that kind of that perp walk, so to speak, that I don't see anytime there's a UK case. And, you know, with the easiest kind of example I can say here is kind of Brian Kohberger. There was so much for the Idaho murders that, you know, leading him up to he didn't end up going to trial. He pled guilty, but that's just one recent example of like this parading of what, you know, again, legally innocent until proven guilty. So before we even get to the trial, the media has already made up their mind. And
well, let's do Delphi. that's probably a great case there. Delphi. We had pictures of this guy. We had a sketch image of who the bad guy was for a while. Then we actually had a guy, and then we had a trial that was wrought with errors. We came to some conclusion, but still people are going to have their doubts.
Yeah, that's a big one here, that there's still
Yeah.
a lot of divide of they didn't get the right guy, or some people saying, yes, they did. And
Or,
like you said, there were two totally different sketches put out. Very
well,
different.
I don't know what the right answer is. Each state can do what each state does, but maybe that case could have been, well, whatever. Look, I'll leave that to people who know that case better than I do. I mean, I've read a few books on it. I've watched it as close as I can. I've got a friend who actually wrote a book about it. Fascinating book. And whatever. Let's move on. We talk about terrible people all day long, and I know that's what people probably tune in for. And Brian Koberger is about as bad as it gets. I think he's absolutely horrible. I can't wait for those victims to have, the victims' families to have some solace and some silence and be able to move on with their lives, because he is absolutely horrible. I can't wait for that case to go away and never happen again. I think it's absolutely horrible. That is one of the worst of the worst, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So you talked a little bit about your podcast, Inesto. For those who are not familiar with it, or aren't familiar with the case that it revolves around, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Okay, firstly, if you haven't listened to Inesto, what's wrong with you? It's a brilliant podcast.
100%.
No. Okay, so this is a story about Adriana Hutto, and it's actually titled Inesto: What Really Happened to Adriana Hutto. Adriana was a 7-year-old little girl who drowned in her above-ground pool in a small little town in North Florida, right on the Alabama border, called Esto, Florida. In the 911 call the mother makes, she rushes outside the back door, sees her daughter floating in the pool, face down, and reportedly pulls her from the pool, starts administering CPR on the ground, calls the police, and they say, "Where are you?" And she just splurts out, "Inesto." And it was such a moving 911 call when you listen to it. And it's in the podcast, and it's easily Googleable. So it's Amanda Lewis is her name. Her daughter was Adriana Hutto. Inesto is the podcast. And she just screams, "Inesto." And you hear it in her voice, the pain of her, well, essentially losing a child. And I heard that, and it really moved me. I then thought, God, that's a terrible story. Parked it in my brain for maybe 10 years. And then, you have these stories. We all have 15 or 20 on the go in our head that we've read bits of, we know about it. You and I could probably chat forever about all the different cases over the last 20 years. This one was one of those, thought something's wrong there. She was convicted for life from a 6-person jury with no parole. And I was never really sure that there was a crime committed. So it's one of those cases where it kind of sits in the back of your head and you think, God, that's terrible. Then I was just clicking through the TV, and on Netflix, I think it is, or Prime, or one of there are other streaming services available. There's a show by Piers Morgan who's very popular here, probably popular in the States as well, I'm sure of it. It was called Killer Women, and it was like episode 2, the first story, and that begins with this 911 call. And I'm just clicking through channels. And there it is again. And I hear it. And I think, okay, let's actually watch the whole story. And I watched the 23-minute segment with Piers Morgan doing what Piers Morgan does. And that's, objective journalism. I'm doing air quotes. Where even if the person is incredibly guilty, he will create some mechanism for us to believe that they might be innocent. And in reverse. So in this case, all evidence will lead into the fact that Amanda Lewis really didn't do anything other than run outside, but he was twisting this into a way. And because she was convicted, he was involving people into the case who were all just saying that she was guilty, and she was convicted. So legally she's guilty, but something stunk to me and I didn't like the story. So I just went online, went on social media. I saw that she had a tiny little following of people, like 300 people were in this Facebook group saying Amanda Lewis was innocent. Her whole trial is on court TV. You can Google it, and Florida versus Amanda Lewis. So I essentially just downloaded them, and at nighttime I started listening to them as my evening podcast, or when I was driving, I just started listening to the court as an audio, not as the video.
Yeah.
And I thought, she's getting absolutely railroaded. You know, none of this stuff seems true. And for example, during the trial, they're chatting away about how the children had no toys. And then in the next sentence, he's saying, so you're outside playing with your toys. And I thought, well, hold on a second. Okay, that doesn't seem right. Then her boy, who was a 6-year-old son, and this is the crux of the story, the 6-year-old son tells police, first he's taken from the scene with his grandmother and step grandfather. He's taken from the scene. He then appears at the sheriff's office, being taken in by the step grandfather with this story that says he saw his mother holding his sister's face at the pool. So the cops then go to town. He tells 15 stories, and one of them is that his mother was holding her down in the pool. So they then look at the body. The body has some bizarre bruises on the forehead and the cheek and the chest and other places, knees. And they couldn't conclude what they were. So the medical examiner then decides that's a handprint on the child's face. Nobody really goes into detail of what that means or the bruises. For whatever reason, the defense attorney, who's a public defender, he doesn't delve into this. It's because the whole story seems absurd to him. He didn't think they had any case. Amanda is essentially poor, although her and her boyfriend both worked full-time, but this is rural Florida. Even though they're working full-time, they don't have a whole lot of money, so they didn't afford, big lawyers or a fancy legal case or experts or whomever else to come and rebut this. Her family are all witnesses for the prosecution, not because, and I find out in the podcast, not because they thought she was guilty, but because they just thought that when you're subpoenaed, you just go. So people she worked with, and all of them tell these stories of how, her little daughter had ADHD and Amanda was, tired of her. And, they lived in this double wide trailer in Florida, and her lawyer, Walter Smith, who's a good guy. He's also in the podcast. He says, you don't have to like Amanda. You don't have to think she's a good mother, but she's not guilty. And the court turned itself to just sort of make us believe, and it worked because she's convicted, even though factually I have problems with the case, that because she's a bad mother, she's therefore guilty of murder. And it kind of just rolled that way. 3 jurors slip off, and 3 more of the jurors come in. It's a 6-person jury, so half of the jury changes in a 2.5-day trial. All of them go to the same church. It's a tiny little community. You can add it all up. The coroner, who says this is the handprint on the child's face. Now, firstly, Amanda is 5'10.5", so she's not a little person. She's quite tall, and this handprint is the size of the child's face, when actually Amanda's palm would fit all the way over the child's face. But nobody really goes into detail. Nobody goes into detail saying, do you know how much force it takes to put seeming fingerprint bruises on somebody's face? You would have to push them into the ground. And this is an above ground pool, so the pool probably would have collapsed if that happened. Amanda was not dry, but certainly not soaking wet. So there's a bunch of things where you kind of go, something doesn't add up here. But it didn't add up so much that I think the jury had no choice but to go guilty, because none of it made any sense. And because it didn't make sense, you've got to convict. And that was kind of how that worked. And it just stunk to me. So I watched the trial, got into it, made the phone call, joined the Facebook group, and tried to get some life into it. It still hasn't grown that much. I'm not sure if Amanda is innocent or guilty, but what I can say for sure is that Amanda did not get a fair trial. That was the most rigged trial I've ever seen. I since do research in this. I've started working with Georgetown University, and they're making an exoneree program, which is brilliant. I'm working now with Colin Miller, who was the attorney for Adnan Syed. You might know that case. It's very big in Serial. If anybody listens to a podcast, you've heard Serial. So I'm working with them closely now to sort of maybe come up with some plan. Not me, they're doing it. I'm assisting with my research to get her a new trial. All evidence leads, in my mind, that there was no crime at all. Adriana sadly drowned in the above ground pool, which is the number one killer of children in Florida. So her daughter had passed away from what is the number one known killer in the state. The child, young boy, the 6-year-old, who's now 23-year-old grown man and a firefighter and a lovely citizen. He's a good kid. He still believes his mother's guilty because she was convicted. And people rest on these convictions as being fact. And they are, because she's in prison. She's therefore guilty. I don't buy it in this case. I have a mistrust, not of the justice system, but I have a mistrust of the Bonifay and the 14th District of Florida. I think there's a lot of things that stink in this case. I think it's worth a second look. And I just started making the podcast, which tells the story historically from start to finish. It begins essentially with this is the town of Esto and the 911 call, and it ends with the moment that she's convicted in her final words. There's a new podcast coming out that's filling in those gaps and doing some expert opinions and stuff. But I want to just do the historical piece like I did with my book. I'll give you all the evidence. There's a bit of my opinion in there. Can't help it. But I play in the podcast, the entire interview that the 6-year-old son does, where he claims he's a witness. I play the entire thing. And in that interview with police, on 3 occasions, he says he didn't see it. But the police say, so tell us about your mom drowning your sister. They don't ask, tell us what you see. They didn't ask, tell us about what happened today. They said, tell us about your mother drowning your sister. So the boy goes, oh, okay. Well, my mom drowned my sister. And here's 2 big guys with guns surrounding a 6-year-old with no child professional in the room. And at one point, the grandmother leaves the room. So he has no blood relative in this room. It is 2 cops and his step-grandfather staring down at this little kid. And they ask him again, tell us about your mom drowning your sister. And he just tells 14 elaborate stories, but they hone in on one. Then they take that story to the coroner, who works for the police, who then writes a autopsy, which is vague at best, that says it's murder. So they have the autopsy report from an expert that says murder. They've got a child witness that they say saw it that didn't see it, that never even says he did it. They make him draw a picture for court, which he draws, and on that picture it says can't see. They put the 6-year-old on the stand. He's, of the 44 minutes he's on the stand, 30 of them he's in tears.
Oh,
It just breaks my heart. If you watch this, it breaks my heart. And it would not happen in the UK. So I'm translating this UK business, my half American side, my half UK side. I'm translating in my head saying, this just stinks. So I thought, let's tell the story. Let's put it on our podcast. And I put it out to the UK market first. I entered it into the True Crime Awards here in the UK because I knew it would outrage the Brits before anyone else. And it certainly has. It's starting to make waves now. We're actually quite climbing up the charts in Ireland, of all places. Imagine that. Maybe they think I'm Irish from my accent. Anyway, it's just one of these stories where small town justice, it's swift, but isn't always accurate.
mm-hmm.
And I speak to Amanda in prison. I'm part of the team now that's helping to build with her appeal. My job here is to tell the truth, to gain factual information and evidence about what's happened at trial. We found all kinds of things about the coroner, how he was fired and rehired, how difficult it is to find coroners. Coroners don't want to work in Florida. It's a difficult job to fill. People don't want to do it. So they often get coroners that are not really well regarded, or the nicer areas of Florida get really good coroners and the rest of the areas of Florida get, it's just a really slippery slope to find a good medical examiner in Florida. And I think Amanda's a victim of it. And I think there's an awful lot of people who are. Now, I just want to finish with this. We're talking about white folks in Florida. The system does not work well for poor people in Florida. The system does not work well for poor white people in Florida. The system works even worse for poor women in Florida. And I would go further to say that if you're of color in the South, I would imagine there's another level where the system just downright doesn't even respect you at all. I'm not going to go into the whole political thing, but if you happen to be someone who looks different than everyone else on the jury and you don't have any money and there's a slim bit of evidence that might suggest you did it, slim, I think you'd be in a lot of trouble in Bonifay, Florida. Just my personal opinion. Because Amanda, there was very little evidence to say she did it. She was a white lady who was known in the community, and she was convicted and serving life without parole for a crime that I don't even think happened. On testimony of her own son. That poor son, AJ, who was 6 at the time, 23 now, never saw his family again. His sister had died. He was interrogated by the police within the hours of his sister dying. He never saw his mom again other than court. There was a brief meeting for his birthday in between her being arrested and the trial. He never saw his grandmother again. He never saw aunts, uncles, never again. So this boy was taken away from his family to protect their conviction. And something just stinks.
That is horrific.
It's a story that just kind of makes you feel bad, but on the same time, I think if you listen to Ernesto, what really happened to Adriana Hutto, and I think you'll start to go, hold on a second, something's not right here. Every bit of it is true. It's all factual. All of the tapes I play are factual evidence that was put into the trial, and I even play parts of the trial. I even found parts of jury selection of the jurors saying, well, I used to work at the same, nursing home that Amanda worked in. Yeah, we talked about her possibly being guilty, but I can still be able to make a rational decision on her guilt. I'm thinking, how are you possibly a juror? Well,
Oh my God.
Because in Florida, you're only allowed 10, objections. And they had dozens and dozens of jurors that all knew the town. It's a tiny little town. So, it's one of those things. Look, it's a sad story, but I think a brilliant tale. And I'm working hard now with Colin Miller, Georgetown University, and others to get her out of prison, or at least, get her another trial. At least maybe get her out on some type of plea so that we can hold the trial again. If that happens, we'll put together all of our evidence. I've been working on it for a long time, and it's my first sort of dive into Florida justice. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and I'm really glad I did the podcast. I'm really glad.
Yeah, I have never heard of this case, honestly, until your podcast. And again, you can see or hear a lot of well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem right. And there's a lot of those moments.
Georgetown has a statistic. I was just chatting to them the other week, and we were doing more bonus episodes for the podcast. And from their research of women who have been exonerated for crimes, 70% of them, a crime was never committed. So 70%. So I interpret that as, say we take Amanda Lewis's case. If Adriana in fact did drown on her own, and this is sad, and we're talking about children, and this is a beautiful little angel who passed away in her own pool. By whomever's hand, or if it was just what happened that day or the accident or whatever it is, a little angel has died here. So it's a tough subject, but if there was no crime, Amanda is serving life in prison in Florida for nothing.
Right.
And Georgetown University has determined that of the women who are exonerated, 70%, no crime was actually committed. So we're talking about maybe a spouse who shot themselves and the wife was convicted for the murder, or whatever it may be. I don't know. I'm just, I don't have much evidence to support all of it other than their findings. And it tends to be believable. And when you watch even shows like Piers Morgan's Killer Women, or others, Snapped is a good one, where they tell these great stories of how the woman just lost her mind and all this stuff happened. Even in half of those shows, you kind of go, hold on a second, she was pretty provoked, and we have a famous case here in the UK in the 60s where the last woman who was executed, she was essentially handed a loaded weapon outside of a pub and pushed through the door and said, kill that guy. And she did. So, there's all these extenuating circumstances I'm going to go something probably isn't a popular thing to say, but even within relation to the Manson sisters, look, they are guilty and they deserve to be in prison, and they were horrible. What they did was terrible, but they were also part of a group that was pushing them into doing something that perhaps they would not have done on their own. I'm not suggesting they're good people. They're not good people. And I think you or I would not have done what they did, put in the same situation.
Right.
What I'm saying is there's sometimes these funny circumstances around it. And again, of the ones who were exonerated, there's not even a crime committed. And I'm starting to lean towards the idea that that's what's happened here with Amanda.
Besides her son, who, I mean, what he's gone through is just traumatic in itself. And then being put on the witness stand, that's just incomprehensible. But were there other family members that questioned if Amanda was guilty or not? Were you able to find that in your research?
Yeah. I think, well, yeah, there's more to this. The step grandfather had a bit to play. He was faxing over information to the police. He was the one who was alone with the 6-year-old. He was said to not be a very nice chap. And, there's some talk of maybe him flirting with Amanda, and he didn't like the way that Amanda was raising her children. Families often have these arguments over how you raise the children. Sisters will argue about, don't tell my kids what to do. This is something traditional within families. And I think he went gung-ho with this story to get Amanda's kids taken away or to get her in some trouble. I don't think he had any idea that the information was going to go so far as to get her convicted and to get her put in prison for life for murder. So I think there was some shenanigans going on with the extended family. There was lots of family that were called to talk about it. But again, we're talking about low-income Florida, and I'm not taking anything away from these people in her family, but they're not skilled in the ways of law.
Right.
They didn't practice their testimonies. It's not like it is on TV where you're taken to this room and they throw horrible questions at you and see how you can handle it. It wasn't like that. This was a 2.5-day trial. It was bang, bang, bang. Amanda's in prison. There was no time to do any of that other stuff. So there was no testing for the witnesses. Little AJ, who was just turned 7, sitting on the stand, it was the first time he had met the defense attorney.
Wow.
So here he is on the stand, not only doing the interviews with the police months before and drawing the picture for people he doesn't know. And again, he was asked to draw a picture of his mother drowning his sister. He wasn't asked to draw what you saw that day. So he drew what they wanted him to draw. Right. So here he's on the stand, and the prosecutor, bless his heart, says, "This nice man's going to come talk to you now, AJ. His name's Walter, and he's a good guy. Do you promise to answer his questions exactly as we decided?" So the prosecutor is already priming the 7-year-old to answer questions for the defense attorney. So this, the chips were stacked. And I just really wish that I wish that maybe there was one other attorney or somebody else to be able to just go, whoa, pull up on the reins. This is going the wrong way. And you've got a lot of misinformation here in the courtroom. Jury took an hour and a half to make their decision over lunch. And the sheriff of the county brought them their lunch. So the sheriff of the county, the one who essentially arrested Amanda, was in the deliberation room.
Oh my God.
You kind of say, you cannot make this crap up. But actually, It's true. And it's actually on court TV. If you go down just before summations, the judge, it's video. You watch it. I've got it in the podcast. He says, we're going to choose lunch now. Sheriff, can you go in the back room and get their lunch order and bring them their lunch? Moments before final summations. So, look, it's Florida justice, and it's one of those cases where it certainly has outraged the UK, and I think it should outrage the rest of America, and I think most of Florida will be outraged as well. So give it a listen. In Esto, what really happened to Adriana Hutto? It's only 6, 7, 8 episodes with bonuses, and we've got a few more coming out. It's not a super long listen, but there's a lot of information packed into a short time, and I think it's worth a listen.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you have, I also can't say enough great things about Joseph Scott Morgan. He is incredible in what he does. And
yeah, great guy. I wanted to be my dad. I think he's awesome. Do you know what I mean? Like, whenever I talk to him as well, I just think there's so much about him that the way he explains things. We've had a lot of great, medical examiners and coroners and pathologists, whether it's Dr. Lee or Michael Baden. There's some great ones over time, and they explain things brilliantly, and it's fascinating. But the way Joe sits and describes it, and then often will put himself in the position of the deceased or just go through historical cases, it makes you always wonder about something new that might be there that we hadn't seen, or he expands on things that I always knew about but never thought were important. He's just brilliant. Joseph Scott Morgan is a great guy.
Yeah. He does a great job of, for somebody like myself who doesn't have any type of education in what he does, as a medical examiner, I can walk away from listening to him being like, I understood everything that he said, because he makes it so understandable to anybody who's listening, which is just, not everybody has that skill.
And you know what's cool? What's cool is if we can geek out a bit, is that when I was recording the podcast episodes with him, there's two, and he goes into detail in both of them. We actually spent a long time. I edited those down because there's moments in the middle of it where he is literally, I'm on the video call with him, and he is literally looking at the autopsy, reading it in real time, first view.
Wow.
So the first time he scans it, he is just saying, that's interesting. Oh, and I don't know what he's talking about because it's gone quiet. I can just see him reading, and he's drinking his coffee, and he's looking through the autopsy, and then he goes, oh, this is interesting. I'll come back to that. And I can see his brain functioning with few words. And then he goes, oh, that's okay. We'll come back to that. And I can see him doing some organization on the screen. And he goes, right, let's go. Okay. So here's what I'm seeing. And then he goes into it and just drops the bomb. And I just was like, wow, this is how a pro works. So yeah, big ups to Joseph. I don't want to, his head's going to start swelling now if we keep going on.
Oh my goodness. So yes, I hope everybody checks out this podcast. I did leave a link below in the description bar of, of where people can find that. But to hear it from you, what platforms can people find this podcast?
You know what? They're on all the different podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, wherever wherever you get your podcast, you'll find it. You can go to inestopodcast.com, and find it there. Also, there's the great people at Fire Eyes Media. They're brilliant. They're the producers of it. You'll find it. CrimeCon websites is on there because it was nominated for True Crime Awards, and also in CrimeCon Denver, it was the nominee for the Clue Awards, best serial podcast. So look, I'm just so honored to have people listen to this little podcast and think that it's good. And I hope you like it too. And if and do listen, and then come back to me, send me a message. I'm on social medias. I'm around, and tell me what you think. If you think I missed something, we'll put it in a bonus episode. If you think you've got some information that maybe we could have done better, let me know. I think the idea is to gather as much information and evidence as we can for this case, so that when we take it to appeal, that we give Amanda a better chance at getting out of prison than what she was given the first time around. So it's kind of about Amanda and some justice for Adriana more than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think it's a good story as well, and getting some justice would be nice.
So Wolf here in the chat, who says it doesn't seem that Amanda Lewis would even have a motive. That's a terrible outcome. Great that he is reinvestigating this.
Motive. Okay, motive's an interesting one. Well, in the trial, the motive was the big thing. They had said that she was, and to me this sounds quite sexist, but you tell me if I'm wrong. She's a mother who just couldn't cope anymore. She had two irritable children who she was on her last wits. She just couldn't take, she didn't know how to discipline them. They were bedwetting. She was working full time. She was tired. She was exhausted. And today was the day that she just couldn't take Adriana anymore. And because of that, she just had enough and she snapped and she drowned her 7-year-old daughter. Now, that's the motive. To me, that stinks because, well, I drove my mom crazy when I was a child. My mom would never think of doing anything like this. I don't know any mothers that would. Certainly, disciplining in Northern Florida is different than when I was disciplined as a child in England. But it's the most unremarkable way to discipline your child is to dunk them in an above ground pool in the presence of your son in the middle of a hot afternoon.
Mhm.
It's, look, mothers have done horrible things to children. It's happened. But the motive of her just snapping and giving up because her daughter had ADHD and today was the day that it happened, it just doesn't seem like a motive to me. So there was a motive, even though it was loose for me. So yeah, no motive, I think, but they built one.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So once everybody here downloads and listens to Inesto, and of course, they've already, based on my book recommendation, read I Don't Like Mondays. I will say, after I did that book review, I did have several people message me saying they bought the book because of that. So I hope they enjoyed it just as much as I did.
There's a new version coming out in April. I've written 5 new chapters, and Dr. Joni Johnston has written a foreword, and we're re-releasing in the United States in time for CrimeCon next year. I'm hoping to present there and actually tell the story. I've got all of the audio and stuff to play and some video of the time and my communications with Brenda as well. There's some stuff I hope to present and put out, but it is being released, and it's being released here in the UK as well by a different publisher. So it's getting legs, and I think the story there is, for those who read it, we begin with right from the beginning. It's Monday morning, boom, and I just go right to the facts as best I can. And we talked about the psychology thing. Brenda never had an evaluation by a psychologist, so if I had had one, I would have put it in the book. But there isn't one. So the first school shooter, or modern school shooter, again, we could argue about this. The first school shooter was never evaluated by a psychologist. Let's just hold that out there.
I know.
So 45 years later, how's that working out, by the way, in America? Just throwing that out. How's the school shooting thing going? Historically, I don't see it getting any better. So perhaps maybe we go back to the beginning again. I'm not saying that my book's going to solve anything. It's not. But we write an awful lot of books about the victims, and we should. We write an awful lot of books about the cops that stopped the killings or what happened during the killings, which we should. But I was the first to write what is essentially a biography of a school shooter, and I got a lot of flack for it. But unless we try and understand the school shooter, I know they're all different, we're never going to come to grips with how we got here, what's happening in the historical context. For some reason, there's a million books about Jeffrey Dahmer. They've even made a ridiculous series on Netflix, which is absolute hogwash, which is like Napoleon Dynamite 2, the way he behaves like Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a joke.
Yeah.
And they glorify serial killers to a point where it's ridiculous. But yet, if you tell the truth about what happened with a school shooter and why they behave the way they behave, you're a terrible person, or we shouldn't do that. But hold on a second. How's that working out? It's not working out very well. We need to go back to the beginning and start again. So when I wrote the book, I followed Brenda's life all the way through. So it tracks her all the way to prison, right up to the modern day, because her behavior in prison is very similar to her behavior outside of prison. She's just sitting dormant. She's a ticking time bomb. And I think it's a book of two halves. I think the first half is about what happened, how horrible it was, how the city tried to rebuild. And then the second half is what Brenda got up to in her free time and how the story changed and how her life went different directions and how she was subjected to suggestion, how her father is probably the biggest scumbag in the world, how the rest of her family behaved, her mother's vacancy. I delve back into Brenda's early life as well. I dig into her story from her family. She didn't even know most of that stuff. When I sent her the book and she read it and she liked it and she commented on it, she came back to me and said, "You told me stuff about my family I never even knew."
Wow.
So I don't know. I don't think writing a book about every school shooter is worthwhile, because I don't think they're worth it. And I think the ones that have killed themselves, the cowards that they are, I don't think retelling their story is worth much. But certainly in Brenda's case, we had another school shooting in San Diego, I guess it was about 21 years later, and it was on a Monday. And when he was arrested, his name's Andy Williams. And when he was arrested, the police asked him, "What, don't you like Mondays?" Like kind of jokingly. And he didn't know what that meant. And then I communicated with him about 5 years ago, and he said, "Oh, that's what that meant." And we had a long chat. He was asked that question. There's another school shooter in Northern California, Eric Houston, who he did something atrocious. He went into school and shot a number of kids and killed a teacher and held them hostage for hours. He was asked as well, "What, don't you like Mondays?" So that expression has popped up in a lot of places, and we use it never really knowing what it meant. And it actually has the most horrific of meanings. So thanks for those who read the book. There is an audiobook version, and there's a new one coming out in April, May next year in the United States. So yeah, buy it now and then buy it again in April or May. I'm just joking. If you want to hold on till April, May, there'll be new chapters and stuff. Pick it up then. And if you got any comments about it, get in touch. I love to hear about it. I love to hear people who've read the book and what they think. And I'm sorry that it's again another subject of children being killed. It's or being shot. It's disturbing, but it's a story again, like I keep saying, needs to be told. So I'm glad you read it, and thanks for reviewing it. Not a lot of people did. I mean, I got some big reviews from some of the big publishers and some of the newspapers in Southern California, but not a whole lot of people gave that a read.
I loved the book. I'm a, not to go like on like a whole nerd thing. I'm a wicked book nerd. I love to read. I'll go through like 13 books a month. And I don't always cover, like if there's one I really, really don't like, I would never go on and bash a book or bash an author. That's not my thing. I'll just put it to the side. But the books I do like that I go on and I review, I'm reviewing them for a reason and because I recommend them. And yeah, that book was definitely one of them. Where
did you find it? Because I published that with a very small publisher out of Denver. Where did you see that? I mean, I actually here in the UK, I was nominated for Best New Author here at the True Crime Awards, and I got highly commended as well. So a huge honor. I was blown away to win that. Yeah. So in the States, we didn't sell a whole load of them. So thank you.
Did you do a lot of my books? I get recommended. I buy from oh God, what's the name of the podcast? It's one of my favorite podcasts. This is horrible. With Dan Zumansky.
Oh, I did dance. Yeah, I know Dan. Yeah.
And that's where I heard it. Then that's where I heard it.
Yeah. I did Dan. Yeah. He's really macabre, isn't he, old Dan? Yeah. I did his podcast. I did True Crime Garage as well, and the sales went up for a couple of weeks from that. I did some of their Patreon stuff, so that really helped. Nick and Patrick, great.
Yeah, I was with Dan. That's one he is responsible. Dan is solely responsible for my bank account being as low as it is at the end of the month.
Really,
I'm
blame him.
Gotta buy that book. Gotta buy that one.
If I remember correctly, I had a pretty good chat with him. It was quite a good discussion. We were really in. He was in tune with what I wrote, so I was really pleased.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, that was a while back. Yeah. No, great. Thanks.
So I will 100% be buying the updated a version that you put up in April with the new chapters, and I will be at CrimeCon next year. It's going to be in Vegas. Look,
I'm hoping to be there as well. I'll get you a copy if I'm there. Don't buy it. I'll get you one. I'll sign it for you as well. Thank you for having me on. Oh yeah, exciting! It'll be a signature for me. Yay!
Oh my gosh! I'm so excited. So, all right, Wolf here is putting in the chat just a reminder of the book, and so people, I'm going to star that. Thank you, Wolf. So before we wrap up, besides the projects that we talked about, are there any other upcoming projects that people should kind of be on the radar for to look out from you?
Well, I'm in the middle of a new book now. I can't talk about it too much. I can't talk about it because I'm tied up a little bit. But I will say to you, that it's about a teenage serial killer, and I've been talking to him in prison for years. And it's not just going to be a book. There's going to be a full podcast with all of the interviews and all of the discussions. It's going to be a conversation with America's youngest serial killer, is what it's going to be. And it's a big thing I'm working on in 2 places, and I'm hoping that it will be huge. I've got a publishing deal here in the UK, and we're hoping to finish it all and package it as one big thing and have it released by September next year. Fingers crossed. I'll come back on. I'll tell you more about that when I can, but I'm in the middle of a deal right now. But it's what I've been working on for quite some time. And I actually paused doing it to do in Esto and do the Amanda Lewis case while it was all happening. But that's really the big thing I'm working on. But I'm actually still touring around the UK doing a lot of speeches and keynote discussions on I Don't Like Mondays. It's an enormous story here in the UK. People are fascinated with it because the song was so big. The Boomtown Rat song was so huge here. People are still fascinated with it. And every week there's another school shooting in the United States. And I just don't think the Brits have got their head around the gun laws of the USA. And I'm often asked to just explain them and, how did we get to this place and what can we fix it? And what do you think will solve school shootings? And, I don't have the answer to that question. I just have the historical, input to say, well, prior to 1960 something, gun violence in schools was virtually unheard of. And it's slowly been progressing since, and it's probably more of the people rather than the weapons, although the weapons are much larger now and available like they've never been available before. So the combination of the two would give us some logic, but that's the only way I can kind of explain it. I'm a believer in the amendment to own the right to bear arms. I believe in your right to defend yourself. That being said, if you broke into my house, if I was living in the United States and I owned a weapon, I didn't, but if I did, if you broke into my house, I would use a gun to defend my family. It's just the way I am. I'll do whatever I have to do to defend my family. Do I need an AR-15 to walk down Main Street, San Diego? No. So I'm kind of maybe, again, half British, half American. I understand the amendment. I get the idea. I understand the concept. But do I need a bazooka to go to the McDonald's? Really? Is that bearing arms? Is that defending myself? Or is that just, I don't know. So, I try and write the book with that same feeling. I try and do all of my stories that same feeling of, hey, maybe moderate is the right way to go. Certainly the way the political climate is happening in America and even here in the UK, a bit of moderation probably ain't going to hurt anybody. It's certainly non-committal, and maybe some non-commitment is what we need right now.
Yeah.
Just that's how I answer the gun question in the UK, because I kind of want to avoid it, because if I tell British people that, I love the old Second Amendment. Yeah, great. Let's all run around like the old West. They look at you like you're insane, because it's just so inconceivable to people here.
Yeah.
But I have to sort of justify it and say, well, actually, hold on. Responsible owners of small weapons, the world was a very different place. So, and it wasn't that long ago. So that's how I try and answer it. Very moderate.
Yeah. Oh goodness. So people in the UK, they
I don't
can
know
go
how you
to
stand on that
whatever.
issue, though. How do you stand on the issue? I'm going to ask you. How do you feel about the Second Amendment?
It's tough because I think, well, I live in a very liberal state here in Massachusetts, but I have family who live in other areas like Texas where, it's just, you can just openly carry. I think something has to give in regards to, even myself here, who's born and raised in the US, taking a step back and saying, no other country has this problem. And why is that? We need to have a real look at that.
Well, there are other countries that have gun problems.
Not like to this extent with school shootings, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The randomness of it, certainly. No. So what's the difference?
Oh, me?
Yeah. What's
the difference? Yeah. I think it's the ease to be able to. They're very easy to obtain here.
Well, I was born in South Africa, and there are other parts of Africa, and there are other parts of South America and other countries where guns are readily available. Switzerland is a country where guns are available, but they're not running around shooting each other. So there's something in America, and I don't know what it is, but the way Americans love to express themselves, they find various ways to do so, and they express themselves like nobody else in the world. Everybody knows what an American thinks. So giving them large weapons, and it's time for them to express themselves, and frustration sets in, and stress of the day, and all the other things. I just think that's what it is. I think it's just a recipe that kind of just happens, where I've got this massive gun. I've had a bad day. I'm going to let somebody know about it, and I'm going to go out with a bang, the great American, thing. I think that's the difference. But hey, that's easy. We've summed it up in 30 seconds. Now let's go implement it, and the world is a safer place. It just doesn't work that way.
It
But
doesn't.
the way the Americans express themselves is something that I love, and we watch it on television here from the UK. And I'm an American, and I understand it differently, and I love the way Americans express themselves. I just don't like the way some Americans express themselves with large weapons. I don't get it, and I never will. But I believe in the right to bear arms.
It's one of those, I feel like there are just so many examples, and not just in regards to weapons, where there are so many responsible gun owners who do the right thing, and and then there's that bunch that doesn't, and it makes it look bad on everybody, and it's a real shame, because that's not how most of them are, and but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it's a large one, but it does tie in, because Brenda, 16-year-old girl, was given a rifle for Christmas, and a month later she's using it to shoot children. Seems a remarkable thing to happen here in the UK, but in America, it's not that uncommon. It just isn't.
Right.
So there you go.
So while we were discussing that, so the Like Mother, Like Murder podcast, Rachel Holloway and Heather Northcraft say congratulations on your nomination for Best
Thank
Show.
you, guys.
I was with them at CrimeCon.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Rachel and Heather. I haven't met you, but I know your podcast, and I look forward to meeting you in Vegas next year, if you're going to be there.
They're going to be there.
Yeah. Really, really kind of you. Thank you. Thank you.
They're going to be there. They glad you guys got together and go live together. Excited to be able to go back and listen fully. Awesome. They are amazing, and yes, you'll definitely meet them if you're in Vegas next year for CrimeCon. They will be there. Yeah,
for sure. I'll buy the first round. I heard you guys had a few drinks out there. I saw the social media.
Oh God. They said yes. And hopefully we can connect beforehand. They're awesome. Yeah. They're absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I know the podcast. Yeah, brilliant. Lovely to meet you.
All right. So I know I asked where people can find your podcast, but you said people can message you. Where can people find you on social media?
I'm N Leigh Hunt. It'll be in the notes or whatever. I'm on all the different social medias at the same at N Leigh Hunt. There also is nleighhunt.com. I've got a contact page there. You'll find me. Yeah, I'm around. You'll find me. I've also got Substack. I'm all the social medias. I'm not big into social media. I find it frustrates me, so I try and stay away from it, but I have to use it. The only way I can get my information out there is by using social media. People just don't drop by the house like they used to, so I got to get it out some way. But I am in all the social medias, and you'll find me. I don't think there's any danger there. You'll find me.
Awesome. And was there, just to give you the last word, was there anything that we didn't, talk about that you want to make sure that you get out before we head out for the evening?
Yeah. I saw on your video, your little YouTube thing, you spoke to Mac McCollum, to Cheryl Mack. How'd you get time with her? I've been trying to speak to her for months. We chat sometimes on LinkedIn, and we send messages back and forth about different stuff. She is a busy lady. How'd you get her on your YouTube?
Oh my gosh, I love Mac.
I know, she's great.
So, okay, we met at CrimeCon.
Really? Okay.
Several years ago, we met at CrimeCon, and message here and there on Instagram, and then I saw her at the next CrimeCon, and just keep in contact. And there was a little small trial here called the Karen Reed trial. If you haven't heard about it.
I know about it.
That's a whole nother thing in itself. And she was covering it on her podcast, and I messaged her that I'm from here, and I was going to go down to the courthouse and kind of see for myself. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, let me know. Like, you're there, boots on the ground. Let me know." And so I would keep in contact with her, and then she asked me to be on her show to talk about it, which would still blew my mind.
Brilliant.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing.
Yeah. Boots on the ground is totally one of her lines, isn't it?
It is. I did.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting out that I stole that from her. Yes, but
No,
yes,
no, no. Still, she'd be happy. She'd be happy that you did. She's big on the quotes, and she loves being quoted. So no. I've been an admirer of her work from a long way away. I saw her on telly and lots of stuff. Yeah, Cheryl is the goat, man. She's awesome. She is absolutely brilliant. Just one of those people I've admired by just the way she conducts herself. And you can be effective and good, like Joseph Scott Morgan. I guess the similar camp. You can be good at what you do and have fun. And
Yeah.
I just think that she's a testament to that. I respect her greatly. Like Dr. Joni Johnston, who's also good friends of Cheryl's. I asked her to write the foreword to my book, and she immediately came back and said, "I'd love to. Thank you for asking me." And she lives in San Diego as well. So I thought she'd know the case for my book. So when we did the re-release, it was like a no-brainer. I was either going to ask Cheryl or ask Dr. Joni Johnson. And I think Joni pipped her to the finish line because she lives in San Diego. It makes sense. But there's just so many people there in the States that I respect for the way that they conduct themselves and the stories they write and the way they tell it. And I think Cheryl's voice, if you listen to her podcast, I mean, just the way she talks, it's just brilliant. You could just kind of listen to it no matter what you're doing. It's just the way hey, y'all, it's just, I absolutely love it. So loads of respect to Cheryl. I think she's fab.
Yeah. All right. I'm putting this out there. So Rachel and Heather are when we do the round of drinks at CrimeCon in Vegas, we'll get Cheryl with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. And I'll buy her a drink too. That'd be great. I owe her one at least. She's helped me with some stuff. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, she's up. She's awesome. But yeah, I got nervous where you were going with that. I'm like, what did I do? What
No.
It
was cool. And she seems so natural, like she knew you. And so I thought that was really cool. No, because I've been trying to get some time with her and she's just so busy. She's everywhere these days. So no, that's why I was asking. That's it.
If I had a quarter of the energy she does,
No.
I swear she fits 80 hours a day into a 24-hour day every single day of the year. I'm convinced.
I know. And she's doing old crimes and new crimes. And then she's in Africa doing the wildlife stuff. And then she's on Crime Cruise. It's just incredible. It's the stamina. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode. And thank you so much, N Leigh Hunt, for coming on Danny After Dark. I really appreciate that. Everybody to make sure to check out Inesto if you have not already. I Don't Like Mondays. Make sure to get that. And then also get the re-release in April. Let's get both. Let's get both. Why not?
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And remember, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.